everyone, thank you for watching this video. This is Sheva of Berrymix Journals over at Instagram. Today, I have a very exciting share. I know I start my video very excited, and that's because I always am. And this time, I'm excited about this collaboration that's going on YouTube, which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with at this point. This is day 24 of the Show Some Style JJ 2023 collaboration for the month of April. This collaboration is hosted by RachandBella Crafts, as you can see here. And as I mentioned, it's day 24 already, and we have had a number of really great shares from the different creators here on YouTube who has gone through and shared their projects for this collaboration. So if you haven't seen their videos, you can watch them by following this hashtag show some style JJ23, JJ for Junk Journal, and you can find all of those videos which are already up. If you're familiar with the collaboration, Rachel has challenged us to create something using two different styles of junk journal making. So basically, there are four. There's botanical, there's vintage, there's shabby chic, as well as steampunk. So for today, I chose the two, two styles that I mostly gravitate towards. So I've definitely done, I think all of them. Steampunk maybe once, or I won't even call it steampunk, but I did do a bit of a grungy journal a while back. So I'll maybe link those below, but definitely vintage, botanicals, that sometimes verge on shabby chic. Those would be within my wheelhouse. So those are the styles that I mostly use for my projects. So for this particular project, I'll be doing, as you can see here, a snippet roll using the vintage style as well as the botanical style. So I've already created one using the vintage style, and Rachel has kindly gifted us with a bundle, a digital kit that we can use for the collaboration, and I used a lot of them in this, a lot of the vintage ones in this particular snippet roll. So that's the project that I chose, is to create a snippet roll using the vintage style as well as the botanical style. So the vintage style I've already done. I've created one already, and then later on we'll try to make a botanical one in the video. But I just wanted to share with you this snippet roll. For those who don't know what a snippet roll is, it's and don't quote me on this. It's basically a strip of either paper base or fabric base. You can choose, you know, what fabric or what base you want to use for your project. For this particular project, I used paper as the base. I've done, I think, a fabric-based snippet roll before, but I thought for this project, I have this. I don't even know what it is, but it's a strip of, I think, gummed paper that I used as the base for my snippet roll. So I just used it so that I know the center, you know, the project is centered. So what I've done is I used a page from the kit from RachandBella, cut it into strips, and then I distressed the sides to create a vintage look. So that's basically for vintage, right? For vintage, it needs to look old, it needs to look worn, it needs to look like it has a life. before you found it, before you used it. So it could be authentic, like an authentic, you know, vintage element, or similar to what I've done in this kit. I used, you know, vintage looking elements like this background paper, and then to add more of that worn look, we usually use distress ink like this one. So I used vintage photo for the inking for this project. So what I've done is that I just did the strips, added these vintage tickets that are also part of the kit, and then I added a lot of the different elements as well. Like this one, I cut this out from one of the kits. And then for vintage, you can also use different vintage stuff like this vintage lace. So I added that there to add a little bit more interest. Let me unroll the whole snippet roll so I can share it with you. So if you don't have a lot of vintage bits, you can just, you know, create something that looks vintagey using the distress ink that I showed you earlier. Like this particular lace isn't vintage at all, but I just run through my vintage ink so that it'll look a bit worn. This was just really white, so I just added a bit of that vintage photo to make it look a little bit more brown. So this is also part of the kit, as well as this, as well as those little tickets. I hope you can see that. I just really had fun sort of creating like a patchwork using the different tickets and then layering them up in the background. This is an authentic bust, vintage bust ticket that I also added in there just to add a little bit of color. More of that vintage lace. You can also use vintage looking brads to add a little bit more texture to your projects to make it a little bit more vintage. This is also a vintage, I think it's a cigar label. It's embossed. I added that there as well. More vintage lace, more brads. And then this is another vintage cigar label. More modern lace that looks a bit vintage. So I thought I'd add that there. More of that vintage lace. A mixture of modern and vintage lace. And this is a vintage label that I got from, I think, one of the hosts that I did. I just really like it there. It's embossed as well, and the blue, I think, just adds a pop of color. More modern lace and vintage lace. So the background here is vintage. More of that label. More vintage lace, vintage label. And then other bits that you can add as well to your projects would be vintage milk caps. So I really love those, and I thought I'd add them there. So how I will use this snippet roll is you use snippets of it for your project. Like for this particular bit, I would cut it here. Imagine cutting it there, and then use this bit as maybe a tuck spot in a project, or you can, you know, just cut like bits of it and then add it as a cluster to, you know, a page, or maybe add a smaller part and add it to a tag, add it to a note card. There's so many use for it. So that's my snippet roll. So this one doesn't lend itself to, you know, being rolled perfectly because it's made of paper. So this is how I roll it, like that. And it's really a way to mass make. I would say making a snippet roll is just, you know, one way of mass making elements that you can use in your junk journal for the future if you don't have one that's ready yet. So that's my vintage snippet roll, and what we will make now is the botanical version of it. So this one has a lot of vintage elements to it, and now we'll make a botanical version. So I have these background papers from the kit that was shared to us by Rachel. And then she also shared these little elements. So these little elements would be very useful for us to make that patch, you know, patch look. So we'll use those. And then I also have some more here in case, you know, I want to use them, want to fussy cut the botanical elements. So I'll just go off cam and cut all of these little bits so that they'll be ready to use when we put together our botanical snippet roll. So I'll be back in a second. Alright, so I'm sorry for the change in lighting, but I did this when it was late at night. And what I did is I just fussy cut all of the little elements, botanical elements that are included in the kit, including these little note cards. So what we will do now is use these background papers and then cut them into strips. So basically hand tear them into different strips that we will then glue into our base. So after hand tearing the strips and then de-stressing the edges, we can now glue them into the paper base that I mentioned earlier. So we just want to make sure that we overlay the paper strips so that there aren't any gaps between your strips of paper. So for this one, I used art glitter glue just because, you know, it's sturdy, it dries fast. So for this one, I would suggest to use a wet glue instead of the glue stick, as it adheres better. Alright, so once you have that strip of paper, the next thing to do is to layer all of these beautiful elements that we have. So what I'm doing now is just getting different papers that I can layer here, different bits. So we have the labels, we have the small note cards. So I'm just trying to look for elements that go together and then just layering them on top of each other. So that's what I'm doing. I'm also making sure that they work, the colors, the design, they work with the background that I have, so that it's cohesive. And then I also try to think of where I will cut it, you know, where I will cut this particular snippet so that it's easier to use in future projects. I'm also trying to make sure that I go over the strip of paper. Sometimes I go over, sometimes I go under. so that there's a little bit of dimension, and it's not just, you know, all one size. So I mean, in the future you can always cut it if you don't like, you know, all of those overhangs, but I just made sure that some of them are hanging, so that there's an option for me in the future. Right, so at this point, this is what we have in our snippet roll. So we have the background made from the strips of background paper. We have the different layering of the different elements, fussy cuts that are from the kit. So at this point, it looks really good already. I mean, there's no reason why you can't use this already, but what I want to do is to add a focal point for each of the little clusters. So like for this one, right, there are so many beautiful elements, but there's really no focal point. So in order to do that, I will be adding more botanical elements. So what can you add at this point, right? So you can add die cuts. So I have this. This is from Tim Holtz. So we can use that. And then these are, I guess they're die cuts as well, but I got this from an Anna Griffin card making kit. So I have those as well, so we can use those. These are, you can use any die cut or any fussy cut flower or botanical element that you have, but this is what I have on hand and it's what I want to use. So what we'll do is we'll just select one or two elements, you know, that you can add to a piece to just give like a central or focal point, as I mentioned earlier, something like that. So we won't do much, just select one or two, add them to different, you know, parts of this cluster that we made. So it depends on what you have. I think that will look good there. Maybe you can choose this, like a bigger version. So this mimics this flower here. It totally covers this element. Maybe. Yeah, so that's what I'll be doing next. I'll select different bits and pieces and try to work on including them here, adding them here as another layer, and then later on we'll also do embellishment. So in the vintage version of the snippet roll, we had lace, we had brads. For this snippet roll, I will be adding these floral trims. So let me find the pink one. So this is a red and pink version. So what I'm thinking is maybe adding them to the snippets just for added texture. So I will be adding them throughout the whole snippet roll, and then I'll get back to you with the final version of this botanical snippet roll. So there we have it, two snippet rolls, one in a vintage style and the other one in the botanical style. I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you so much for watching.